Hello and welcome back to our next instalment of A Bushy Tale. Now, if you remember yesterday, Squish has got a plan to fight off the Greys who are due, they think, at any time. But in order to do that, he wants to call a meeting. So now we have, if I can just find the right place, chapter 7, in which a small squirrel calls a big meeting. "You can't call a meeting," Squish's father said. He didn't seem sure whether or not he wants to laugh again. "Why not?" Squish asked. He really didn't think his father was taking him seriously. "No one has called a meeting for years and years. The last time was when Professor Otis wanted to set up lessons to teach young animals to read, but that was Professor Otis and not you." "Well, why not me?" Squish wanted to know. "You're a very young squirrel, not a wise old owl. Young squirrels don't call meetings. Now come and have your breakfast." Squish realised he was quite hungry, so he sat down while his mother served the acorn mash. "Squish wants to call a meeting," his father said. "That's nice," his mother replied. Squish thought she was too busy making the breakfast to listen. "I still don't see why I can't," Squish said. Magnus stopped eating. "Older animals can call meetings for very important things, but meetings are very rare. I can only remember the one Professor Otis called, and I don't know when there was one before that. Not in my time. Meetings are for all the animals, so it has to be about something very important which will affect everyone. No one will come to a meeting which is just about squirrels. Who will be interested in that?" "But it does affect everyone. Everyone needs the trees. If the Greys take all the nuts and acorns, there won't be any trees for anyone." Squish's father smiled. Squish thought it looked like a sad smile. "You mean well, young Squish," he said. "I'll tell you what, you go ahead and call your meeting, we'll see what happens." "I will," Squish replied, finishing the last of his acorn mash. As he left the dray, he thought he heard his father say, "It will never work." "We'll see what happens," Squish thought, as he raced down the trunk of the tree. "We will." The first person Squish went to see was Professor Otis. He knew that Professor Otis was supposed to be the oldest owl in the woods and always seemed quite stern, especially with young animals who didn't pay attention in his lessons. But Squish also knew that the professor talked to all the other birds. There was no use in Squish talking to the birds because all they seemed to want to do was fly around twittering and tweeting to each other. If anyone could get the birds to come to a meeting, it would be Professor Otis. Professor Otis lived in a nest in the branches of a very old tree. There was a battered old wooden sign on the trunk of the tree which read, "Professor Wickie-Woo Otis, MIWO, member of the Institute of Wisest Owls." Squish had been to the nest many times for lessons, and he knew that it was full of books and not much else. Animals' books, by the way, aren't like the books that you know. They're written on leaves and pieces of bark in writing you wouldn't be able to read. You've probably seen some animals' books lying around and not realised what they were. Squish was nervous about going to the professor's nest because it usually meant having lessons and being told off. He knocked on the nest and waited. "Who's there?" Professor Otis called from the inside. "It's Squish, Professor Otis, sir," Squish said. "Come in, young Squish," called Professor Otis. "It's not time for lessons yet, is it?" "No, sir," Squish said as he went into the nest. He could hardly see the professor behind piles of books. All he could see was a pair of bright yellow eyes looking out at him. "Professor Otis, sir, I want to call a meeting. Would you please tell the birds it will be at sundown today in the clearing in the middle of the woods?" "A meeting?" Professor Otis asked. "And why would a young squirrel like you call a meeting?" "We have to stop the Greys from taking the nuts and acorns. I want everyone to help." "Ah," said the professor, "the grey squirrels. Well, young Squish, I'd love to help, but you see I have all these books to read. I have to teach all you young animals, so I'm very busy." "But if the Greys take the acorns, there won't be any more trees," Squish said. "Where will the books come from then? Where will the birds make their nests?" "Now, Squish," Professor Otis said, "there will always be trees. I'm very old and there have always been trees as long as I have lived here." "Well, if you're too busy, will you please tell the birds?" "I'll see if I have time," Professor Otis said, and went back to his reading. Squish thanked him and left. Squish decided to go and see the badgers next. Brian's father was always very friendly, and Squish wanted to talk to a friendly animal after seeing Professor Otis. He found the entrance to the badgers set and knocked on a root near the opening. Brian's father came to the entrance. He seemed to be covered in soil, but this was nothing new to Squish. Brian's father was always covered in soil. This is why everyone called him Earthface. But in Badger, that was a very great compliment because it meant you were the best digger. "Hello, Squish," he said, shaking himself. "You're up very early. I think Brian's still in bed." "I wanted to see you," Squish explained. "I'm calling a meeting and I'd like you to tell the other badgers, please." "A meeting? Is this about the grey squirrels?" "Yes, it is," Squish said. "I have a plan to stop them and I need everyone's help." "Well, that's very clever of you," Earthface said, "but we're a bit busy at the moment. Tunnels to dig and all that. There are some very big tree roots we need to dig round." "But if the greys take the acorns, there won't be any trees," Squish said. "You won't have any roots to dig round." "There'll always be trees," Earthface said. "Everyone knows that." Squish told him when and where the meeting would be, thanked him and left. Next, Squish went to see the foxes. He usually tried not to speak to Colin's father. His name was Ray, which was short for Rabbit Scourge, Reynard, the swiftest hunter of all time. The foxes called him something else in their own language, but it just sounded like a lot of snarls and growls. Fox was a very strange language, Squish thought. Squish was nearly at the fox's home when there was a rustle in the undergrowth and a red snout filled with teeth popped out. It was followed by the rest of Ray. "Hello, Squish," Ray said with a grin, which Squish thought at first meant he was about to be breakfast. Sorry, something in my teeth." "What can I do for you? Are you looking for Colin?" No, sir," Squish said. "I wanted to see you. I'm calling a meeting about the greys." "A meeting, eh?" Ray asked in a voice which most people would use when they said "a barbecue," and licked his lips. "Well, I'm not sure what your greys have to do with us foxes." "They're going to take all the nuts and acorns," Squish told him. "I can't be doing with nuts and acorns," Ray replied. "Too dry, if you know what I mean. Anyway, we're very busy. We have a big hunt planned." "But without the nuts and acorns, there won't be any trees. Without the trees, there won't be any of the things that you like to hunt." "Don't be silly, Squish," Ray said. "There will always be trees, and there will always be things to hunt." Squish told him where the meeting was to be held, thanked him, and left very quickly. For the rest of the morning, Squish went round talking to the other animals, but the answer was always the same. They were too busy. The hedgehogs were busy making their nest for the big sleep and didn't seem to understand that without trees they would have nothing to make their nest out of. The rabbits were very busy doing something, and anyway, for some reason, they didn't really want to come to the meeting if the foxes were going to be there. Even the smallest mice and voles said they had something more important to do, even though everyone knew that mice don't do anything important. Nobody seemed interested in the meeting. Squish went back to his dray feeling very small and sad. "How did it go?" his dad asked. "Nobody cares about the trees," Squish said. "I didn't think they would," Magnus said. "They don't care for anything apart from their own business. So, no meeting then?" "Oh no," Squish told him. "I'm going to have the meeting, even if it's just me on my own." Chapter 8, in which a meeting is held. Squish felt very small as he went into the clearing in the middle of the woods. The sun had disappeared behind the trees, and the tall trees cast very long shadows across the clearing. From the woods he could see the birds twittering their last messages of the day to each other. Squish stood in the middle of the clearing and looked around. Apart from the distant birds and the whispering of the evening breeze in the trees, there was silence. Squish had never felt more lonely. He should have known the whole thing was a waste of time, and that the other animals were too busy to come. He was just about to leave when he heard a rustling in the undergrowth. "I thought you might need some company," White Tip said. Squish had never been so glad to see anyone in his life. He wanted to say he had hoped that White Tip would come and that he didn't care who else turned up now. "Your dad'll kill you," he said instead, "and me." "Who's going to kill you?" Brian said, pushing his way through a knot of tall grass. Brian, thanks for coming, Squish said. But I think it's only us. No, it isn't, said another voice behind them, and Colin, too, emerged from the bracken. My dad doesn't know I've come either. Oh, yes, he does, Ray said as he came out of the shadows. And now everyone else does, too. Squish could make out the glow of 4 or 5 pairs of fox eyes blinking in the shadows. Is this where the meeting is? Added yet another voice, and Earthface and 3 other older badgers pulled themselves out of a hole at the edge of the clearing. Squish had not even seen that there was a hole there until a soil-covered badger's head popped out of it. Yes, Squish cried, yes it is. With a flutter, a group of small finches landed on a branch nearby, chattering to each other. Then a shadow crossed the clearing, and the unmistakable yellow eyes of Professor Otis could be seen looking out from another tree. The books can wait, he said. I wanted to see what young Squish has learned. Squish looked around, his heart pounding. Suddenly the clearing was filling up. Hedgehogs uncurled. Mice scurried up close so they could hear. Rabbits appeared, ears first, out of the holes in the ground, but made sure that they were on the other side of the clearing from the foxes. Then there was a rustle in one of the trees on the edge of the clearing, and one after another, Squish's parents, his brothers and sisters, White Tip's father, who didn't look at all pleased, and all the older squirrels lined up along the branches. All of a sudden it was silent again. Squish stood in the middle of the clearing, surrounded by all the other animals, friends and strangers alike, and had no idea what to do next. Squish, Magnus said, everyone has come to hear what you have to say. Don't you think you'd better say it? Squish still didn't know what to say until he felt a paw on his back and White Tip firmly pushed him forward. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming, he said in a voice which was little more than a squeak. Then he glanced at White Tip, cleared his throat again, and began. You all know that the Greys are coming. I know you don't think it has anything to do with you. Squirrels, one of the fox muttered. Let the boy speak, Ray said clearly in a voice which threatened what might happen to anyone who didn't. But it does, you know, Squish carried on. It affects all of us. We squirrels have a secret, you see. Squish stared at his father and the older squirrels. The older squirrels all whispered to each other and then to Squish's father. He looked Squish directly in the eye and then nodded slowly. Tell them. We all need trees, Squish said. We live in them, or make our homes out of them. We even make books out of them. Some of us eat things that grow on them. We all need the trees so we can live. Well, of course we knew that, Earthface said, and the other badgers nodded in agreement. We all knew that, echoed a hedgehog who Squish thought was called Spike. Most hedgehogs seem to be called Spike. They don't have much imagination. Shh, White Tip said angrily. The hedgehog snuffled but said no more. So what has this got to do with your problem with the Greys? Ray asked impatiently. Everyone thinks that we squirrels hide nuts and acorns and then can't remember where we hid them. But, Squish paused for breath, we know. That's your secret? Ray asked. Is that all? I think we're wasting our time here when we could be out hunting. At the mention of the word hunting, several rabbits disappeared back down their burrows. Let him finish, Ray, Squish's father said. Please. We hide nuts and acorns and pine cones because trees grow out of them, Squish said loudly. There was a longer pause. Then there was a bark of laughter from the foxes and some of the birds tittered along with them. Be quiet, a loud voice shouted, and the laughter stopped. Professor Otis spread his wings and soared down to stand next to Squish and White Tip. What the young squirrel says is true. You knew? Squish asked, astounded. I read a lot of books, Professor Otis said. Didn't I always say that reading is good for you? Now tell them what you need them to do. The Greys want to take all the nuts and acorns for themselves. If they take them, no more trees will grow. What will we do then? Where will we live? What will we eat? This will affect all of us, not just the squirrels. I know how we can all work together and stop the Greys from ruining our woods. There was a chattering, a twittering, and growls and snuffles as the animals and birds all spoke to each other. Then Ray and Earthface and an older hedgehog called Spike Senior all padded across the clearing and stood with Squish, White Tip, and Professor Otis. Well then, young squirrel, Ray said, what exactly do you want us to do? And you will find out what Squish's plan is, and whether it works or not, tomorrow if you come back for the final part of A Bushy Tale. Thanks for listening.